Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining Housing Happenings. And we're going to get started here. I want to thank you for joining and thank our guest speaker, Heather Murphy, Director of Move Management at Abilities Network. She's going to be talking about hoarding in affordable senior housing. And we'll leave some time at the end for questions. You can also feel free to use the chat. Heather, I will hand things over to you. So thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Dee, I will say if there are things that pop into the chat as I'm going, because I had to kind of hide all of my other screens, just speak up for me and let me know what the questions are, and I'd be happy to answer them as we're going through, or we can hold them for later. So, all right. Is everybody ready to talk about hoarding? So I know that this is a big concern oftentimes, especially in affordable housing. But before we get into the topic, I just kind of wanted to introduce myself. I am Heather Murphy. I am a senior move manager, and I work for a nonprofit called Abilities Network. We started providing services to seniors 15 years ago, but we've been around since 1964 doing lots of other things. So the senior services divisions, like I said, started in 2011, and we help people typically with the downsizing and the moving process. But a natural offshoot of that has been working with people who have some clutter and they need help with getting that organized and cleaned up. So we're going to talk a little bit about hoarding, and then I'm going to show you a couple of case studies that we have been very successful with in our program here at Abilities Network. And just for those of you on the call, we are based in the Baltimore area, and these services are available in that area from us. If you're outside of kind of the greater Baltimore metro, you can certainly reach out to me and I can help connect you with others in your area that do similar work to us. What does make us different is that we are a nonprofit. So I will talk to you a little bit later on about some of the grant funding that we're able to get. But as far as we know, we are the only nonprofit move manager out there. So I'm not sure what other funding sources are available outside of kind of our area at this point, but we can help point you in the right direction. So before we kind of get started about our case studies, let's just kind of talk a little bit about hoarding and kind of what it is, what are the characteristics, what are the criteria to meet that hoarding diagnosis. So hoarding is defined as a persistent difficulty with discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their actual value. So that's the important part there, is the actual value, because to the person who is collecting the things, there is a perceived value, which is really much higher to them. And they also have a perception that they need to save the items, and they get a lot of emotional distress, emotional feelings associated with letting go or discarding items. So I like to use an example here that I actually heard in a conference that I was attending, and one of the topics was hoarding. And the presenter said, handed out the little caps to water bottles, right? She handed them out to all of the tables, and she said, now look at this water bottle cap and come up with all the things that you could use that for, right? So people were saying it could be, a paint, a little thing to put paint in to use. It could have your contacts in it. It could be a seed starter for plants. It could be used in crafts. So all these ideas were coming out. And she kind of said, now you understand a little bit more about the mind of someone who does save things that seem invaluable to others. And that's kind of the way that a hoarder's mind tends to work. So about 4 to 6% of our population is considered to have hoarding disorder. That I think is on the low side, because the underreporting of this is so big. A lot of folks do not report that they are hoarders. They don't just come out and say, hey, I'm a hoarder, let's report me. So I think that 4 to 6% is awfully low. And there is a difference between object hoarders and animal hoarders, but about 40% of those that hoard objects also hoard animals. Um, we see that statistically, the hoarding is slightly more prevalent in males versus females, but it's ironic that most of the work that we do with people is with females. And I think part of that is maybe a little bit more willingness to admit that they need help or take help. Um, and that's just an anecdotal observation on my end. Hoarding doesn't just happen in the elderly. It actually, a lot of the symptoms begin really in childhood and adolescence and just increase and exacerbate throughout their lifetime. But we do see a bit of an increase in the depression era folks who are now elderly because, when folks were going through the depression and there were not resources to be had readily, and they were taught to keep, reuse, you would mend clothing instead of buying new, and that's very different from the way that we live now. So we have our common or object hoarding, like I said, and our animal hoarding. So the common hoarding is really what we focus on. It's the excessive saving, collecting, or inability to discard things that are no longer needed. And obviously, animal hoarding is its own beast, for lack of a better word. Um, it is not something that we focus on. So, for those of you who don't know, hoarding was added as its own diagnosis in 2015 in the DSM 5. And so now it is actually treated as its own diagnosis. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But so there is a hoarding scale that we can use to determine the severity of someone's hoarding behaviors. And it's scaled from 1 to 5, right? 1 is your everyday person, might have a little bit of clutter, but nothing serious and no safety issues. All the way up to a 5 is basically what you see on those TV shows like Hoarders and things like that, where it's floor to ceiling. Sometimes the house is starting to deteriorate. There are no longer working utilities and things like that. So we really find ourselves working in that level 3-ish area. And again, we found a lot of success working with people who are currently in subsidized housing and at risk of eviction due to a clutter issue. So we can come in and help them get their apartments cleaned up so that they can pass a reinspection and are able to maintain their housing. That's really our niche in this arena. Um, so some of the symptoms and characteristics that we see in the folks that we have worked with in the past is, contrary to popular belief, hoarders are often incredibly intelligent. They have developed a brain that will help them to hoard and have this behavior, but still navigate their personal lives, and oftentimes are hiding this issue from those that they love the most. And so sometimes that takes a whole lot of intelligence, but even just the intelligence factor in general in people who hoard is quite high. It sounds very odd, but there is quite often a perfectionism side to hoarding. And one of the ladies that I worked with, she had jewelry, and the jewelry was nothing but a big jumbled mess, kind of in a Ziploc bag. And she had a few of these Ziploc bags, and she just kept that jewelry where it was. And at one point, she said one of her goals was to clear out a dresser drawer so that she could put her jewelry away in the dresser drawer. So that's what we worked on. We cleared out the dresser drawer. And before the next time I came back, she was to work on getting some of her jewelry organized. Well, when I tell you that this jewelry was organized like to a T, you would have thought it was done by someone in the military. That's how perfect it was. And it just dawned on me that her perfectionism of wanting it to be that way was what was keeping her in that hoarding situation, because she couldn't get herself there to where she could have it perfect. So she was just kind of like, to heck with it. If I can't have it perfect, I don't even care anymore. We see a really high incidence of teachers, nurses, and social workers who do have hoarding tendencies. Again, an anecdotal thing that I have kind of observed is that these are professions that are really caregiving professions, and really often um, give accolades to the people who are putting all those other people before themselves. And so not taking care of themselves almost becomes part of the habit. We have also found that over the years, there is always a trigger. So if you are working in senior housing, which many of you are, and you have someone who is hoarding, and we know it's difficult to work with, it's very challenging. You can have conversations until you're blue in the face, but once you start to really get to know the person, there's almost always trauma of some sort in the background. So coming at it from a trauma informed view, or approach is really, really helpful. Oftentimes, because of that trauma, or because of that abuse, or because of that grief that they are dealing with, they are looking for something to replace the self-worth that they have lost. And so the objects become part of their identity. And there is a huge amount of anxiety in discarding things. Well, what if I need it later? Right? That is what we hear all the time. So we'll see some specific behaviors around hoarding. Of course, the actual accumulation of things is the main behavior, but there are some other things that we see. This term called churning. And basically, what churning is think about churning butter, right? So when you churn butter, you're pulling the bottom part up to the top and churning the top part down to the bottom, right? So same thing with churning and hoarding. They are basically going through their hoard and turning it upside down, or moving it around in a way that makes them feel like they've done something or worked on it, when in actuality they've really done nothing, because they haven't let go of anything. So they're just moving it around instead of making progress on the hoard itself. They will continue to acquire items. When we work with people, we make it very clear that one of the rules of engagement with us is that there is no more purchasing from Amazon or Home Shopping Network or QVC of unneeded items, and that we will, monitor that as we go. We're not really going to talk much about animal hoarding because that's not our ballywag, but that can be a behavior of hoarding. We find one of the most common things with folks who have a clutter issue is that the organization and categorization of items is really difficult. So this is where we might see some ADHD as well in the adults. And that categorization is really the key component, because if you think about it, if we talk about, I don't know, an object, in our mind, the spoon needs to go in the kitchen because it's a kitchen item. But in that person's mind, but the spoon could have to go with the silver because it's silver, or it might need to go with my cat's stuff because I need to use it to feed my cat. So they have a really hard time like putting things into categories because they see so many options of the categories. Someone who hoards is prioritizing the stuff over the people in their lives, which often leads to a lot of social isolation. And this is something that we really saw get even worse during the times of COVID. So, as you all know, there are lots of mental health correlations that go along with hoarding. We've already talked that it is its own disorder now in the DSM 5. It used to be that it was a subcategory of obsessive compulsive disorder. And studies have shown that a third of people who are diagnosed OCD also hoard, but hoarding has become its own diagnosis. We deal a lot with depression, anxiety, ADHD, clearly with people who hoard all through their life. But as we deal with older people in senior housing, we also have to think about the dementia piece or the cognitive decline that may also be contributing to hoarding. If someone cannot remember a lot of the things, that are recent in their life, they will often leave things out. So think about this: if I can't remember where to find my clothing, I might leave piles of clothing all over the place so I can easily find it. We get asked all the time, all right, am I a hoarder? Do I have too much stuff? And of course, we don't judge, but there is a difference between hoarding and collecting, right? So collecting is something you do with your loved ones. It's something that you are proud of. It's something that you are happy to display and showcase, and it's something that makes you happy, that brings you joy, and that other people can kind of be involved with. So, for instance, my mom used to collect salt and pepper shakers, and she had a way to display them that was nice, and it was honoring those things that she collected. And we could actively participate in her collecting because we could, if we find salt and pepper shakers that we thought that she would like, we could give them to her as gifts. That's the difference between collecting and hoarding. Hoarding is when the collection becomes more important than the people. It also becomes oftentimes very embarrassing. There's a lot of shame and guilt that go along with hoarding. So they're not really proud of the hoard versus the collection. They're not often willing to share their space. Like many people who hoard, their family has not been in their homes for many, 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 many years. They'll often meet people out rather than having them come in. And you can see the difference between these two pictures. The left side is, books and magazines and papers, lots of papers. And the hoard is also lots of papers, books and magazines, but it's not organized in a way that is showing that thing any value or honor. So hoarding really has lots of outreaching effects, particularly on the person that is hoarding, but also on the people who surround them and are in their lives. Extreme hoarding, especially in senior living, falling is a huge concern. And if you have an apartment that looks kind of like this, a fall is almost inevitable. Right. And we have to make sure that we're keeping that in mind. Emergency personnel would not be able to get to someone who fell in the middle of that living room. In addition to that, especially in senior living, we also see that hoarding can correlate with fire hazards or fire safety concerns, things being stored in the stove, on top of the stove. Yes, I've seen it. Extension cords plugged into extension cords plugged into extension cords because they can no longer reach the wall or the outlets. And there is an effective infestation too. We see this a lot where either rodents or insects or bed bugs become a major issue because the remediation companies can't get into an apartment to remediate it well when it's cluttered like this. And that's where it really starts affecting those that live around this person. Again, we have some health risks here. We are certainly more, like I said, in that level 3 arena when it comes to hoarding. So the biohazard situations are not as common for the work that we do, but when you're talking about extreme hoarding, that certainly is a challenge. Foodborne diseases, because people who hoard tend to also hoard food. Especially that Depression era those folks that grew up in the Depression era are more commonly hoarding the food, and especially the food that is expired and no longer good. when you have an apartment that is completely cluttered, it's really difficult to do your activities of daily living, right? You may have things stored in a shower. So how are you taking a shower? How are you getting in and out of your bed or your chairs and sofas with ease? Probably not. So there's lots of treatments that can be utilized when this is an issue for someone. The biggest things that we find have worked well are CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy that is done by a therapist that can work them through the process of starting to let things go, and medication. Medication definitely for managing any of those diagnoses, particularly the mental health diagnoses, and making sure that they are healthy. In addition to that, there are kind of two trains of dealing with the stuff itself, not just the mental health. The mental health is a huge component of this. And I will say that we almost see 0% success rate in people who do not also receive mental health support when they are working through the hoarding issue. And I say almost because there is this subsection of people who look like true hoarders, but don't have the mental health piece of it. The reason their apartments are cluttered the way they are is because of a physical incapability of being able to navigate that on their own. And they've just let it go too far without calling someone to help them. The true mental health component that makes people collect and not be able to get rid of things and things like that, that's where we really almost always say you have to have therapy in order for this to work. And while the therapy is going on, then you can have people boots on the ground, like actually working with the person. And that's where these two trains of thought come in. One is the one-on-one organizing, and one is like a full-scale clear out. So the one-on-one organizing is what we do with the folks that we work with in senior housing, because it's just kind of a one-on-one thing. We're working through the process, we're building trust, we're building rapport. We are really working hard with that individual to come up with goals, work on the goals, and get the apartments more organized and clean and tidy for them. The full scale clear out is really for those level 4s and 5s that are living in the community in a home that really just need that team of people to come in and just start getting stuff out of the house. And here are some resources that can help with this. And I can certainly provide a copy of my presentation back to Dee and Sarah so they can share it out with everybody, and you can have these links. And some support groups that are out there as well. All right, so I want to share a little bit about our successes. This is the feather in our cap where it comes to Move Management Services, because again, I think we are one of the only organizations out here doing this work in a way that has grant funding and helping lower income seniors who are living in senior housing versus those who are living elsewhere and might be able to hire for services in a different way. And so this is Miss Edith. And I first met Miss Edith because her building manager had contacted me and said she needed help. And she needed help because she had had 2 falls and was not able to come back to her apartment in this state after being in the hospital after those 2 falls. So we quickly got to work. And as you can see, she had some paper clutter issues. She had lots of like magazines and catalogs that are piling up back there towards the window. She had this beautiful china cabinet over on the left-hand side of her living room that almost had nothing in it. She wasn't using the storage space for what it was. And she just kind of had stuff everywhere. Miss Edith was one of those that kind of had a little bit more of the physical limitations. And so we were able to get in and start working with her. But as you can see, her windows are blocked, her egress, ingress, and her entries were blocked. And she had clearly had a fall. So there was a concern here for her safety as well. So we started working with her, just kind of picking an area, going through that area, and deciding if she needed to keep something or if she could let it go. If she could let it go, we took it away after that session. We work in 2 hour increments. So my team member would take that stuff away after working with her that she had agreed to let go. And then we would do whatever with it we had talked about, whether it's recycling it, shredding it, throwing it away, or even donating things if they were usable. So we would do that. And we worked with her for several weeks at first. And then we came up, it was kind of slow going because she wanted to see every single paper, even if it was like a catalog that was from like, I don't know, 2000 and, 5. She wanted to look at it. So after we built some rapport and some trust, we came up with some ground rules. And the ground rules with her were if the catalog or magazine were older than 2 years old, we could automatically put that in the recycle area, in the recycle bag. And so that started to make progress happen more quickly. By the end, we had worked through, and this is now her apartment. So we were able to get her pretty things into her china hutch, which displayed them nicely. She has clean, clear paths. Her apartment was much cleaner on a housekeeping standard. Her books were able to get in her beautiful bookcase. All the clothing was put away, and she was able to navigate her apartment much more safely. We also worked with Miss Ray. Miss Ray was a journalist in her previous career. So she had lots of paper, but her paper was different than Miss Edith. It wasn't just catalogs and magazines and kind of junk mail. It was more calendars and snippets of paper and articles cut out of newspapers and some journals and some things. She was still hoping to be able to get back to journalism. So she also had notebooks full of notes and things like that, plus all of her other things that you can see here piled up. And very similarly to Miss Edith, we worked 2 hours at a time, one on one with her, going through specific areas each time until we were pretty much through the whole apartment. And we started to come up with some organizing skills for her and some techniques that might help her with organizing all of that paperwork, and helped her really think about how to do that herself on a weekly basis, because what we're doing is trying to get these folks to the point where they're passing inspections and their apartments are clean and tidy so they can maintain it going forward. So we really want to teach some organizing skills along the way. And this is what her apartment wound up looking like. And if you see in that bedroom, the very right picture, it looks like oversized books stacked up on each other. That's actually a piece of furniture. So those are drawers inside, but she did use that to organize her paperwork, which I thought was a really cute and ingenious way to do that. And so these are only two of our many, many, many successes that we have had in this program. I'm going to stop sharing now and kind of come back on camera. I will say that, again, the feather in our cap is that we're able to salvage housing for seniors who would otherwise be evicted. And if they are in senior housing, affordable senior housing, it is very difficult for them to then find other housing if they ever get evicted, right? Because other affordable housing sees that ding on their record for being evicted, but yet they can't afford market rate because they're in affordable housing. So there's this like cycle of what happens? What do? You don't want to, as building managers, evict someone who is going to wind up homeless. And so we've kind of been able to be the solution in many of those cases, and we have a 100% success rate. with our residents and maintaining their housing. So that's something we're really, really proud of. And it's partially because of our approach and it being one-on-one, and it is a little bit longer of a process. So if they are at risk of eviction, we're not going to get it cleaned up in, a day or a week. It's going to take several weeks, sometimes even a couple of months. But if we're able to work with management and housing and say, hey, listen, they are making progress, we are making this work, because the last thing you want to do with someone who has a hoarding issue is just go in and clear it all out and be done with it and get rid of everything. And I know that seems like the right solution, and that seems like the right solution because we are not hoarders. Okay. So if you do that to someone who does have hoarding disorder, what's going to happen when you leave is they are going to rehoard. They're going to rehoard faster. They say twice as fast is actually the statistic, and twice as severe. So it is actually long-term not the right answer. So we've just been really proud of the work we've done. And again, because of being a nonprofit and having that grant funding, which by the way is available to any resident who is at risk of eviction due to this issue, who is living in senior housing, affordable senior housing here in the Baltimore market. We've been able to also make this very affordable for the person receiving services. And a lot of people will say, well, why don't you give it to them for free? Well, we need them to have a little bit of skin in the game. So we do have them pay a little bit. It's pretty nominal. It's like 25% of our regular rate, which is typically affordable for them. And we work through all of that. But it's a nominal amount because if they're not invested in it, they're not going to be invested in it. So that's kind of what we've learned over the last 13 plus years of doing this work. So I will kind of open it up for questions. If anybody has questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them. What are you seeing in your communities? Come off mic.
Heather, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I wonder if you could just talk about your experience. I'm sure you run into situations because of the hoarding where there's also some sort of infestation of some sort that exists. And how do you partner with the communities and other providers in that way? And where do you draw the line on what you can and cannot do?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So for the health and safety of our team members, we do take that very seriously. Our line is an active infestation. So if somebody has a couple ants or some fruit flies or, that kind of stuff where it's reasonable, we will still work with that person. If we have active, severe infestation, or if it's a bed bug issue, that's where we have to draw the line, because that is very challenging to navigate. So what we would say and we would recommend is to have the remediation company at least come in and do an initial remediation so that the activity is cut down. Once we get that they have done the remediation, we can get in there and get some of the organizing done. And then the remediation company will probably need to come back out again afterwards. But that's kind of how we handle it. There are some remediation companies who will also do some of the like pack up and getting things kind of out of the way so the remediation can happen. So depending on what company is called in, we can kind of work together through that process. Great question. And I do see one in the chat from Unique Carter. Thank you for popping that in there. It says, do you also partner with a mental wellness company to assist with this, or is that something the individual will need to find on their own? No, I didn't mention that. So thank you for bringing that up. We have, because everybody that we work with is obviously on Medicaid usually, or Medicare, sorry. we do tell them to kind of at least tap into the providers that are covered by Medicare and to contact Medicare to see who is a provider in their area. Because a lot of the solo practitioners don't take Medicare. So I have to be kind of careful with making those referrals or recommendations. There are actually very few providers that work specifically in hoarding, but can help with the anxiety, the OCD, and the depression, which is really important. Um, I've also had a lot of good success with like social workers and people who are care navigators, especially for like Johns Hopkins Elder Plus has some social workers that work in their practice and will help with this process. If there is mental health involved, and we always hope that there is, we do our best to have the residents sign releases so we can communicate openly between us and the mental health provider, because that is a really important line of communication to be able to keep open so that we all stay on the same page and are making progress. So that's a really good question. And if you guys have any good referral sources for Medicare providers in this arena, in the mental health arena, I would love to have them just for our resources as well. But I mean, I have people who see their therapists and either, have been seeing them forever or have been connected through their service coordinator in their building. So I just haven't gotten a hold of like a couple of really good ones yet. What other questions?
Heather, thank you so much. I wanted to ask, how do you incorporate families, or if you incorporate families, what does that look like?
Yeah, so a lot of times we find that by the time we are getting called and being referred in, this is not the first time that the family has been made aware of an issue like this. Most often, the family is either not involved or don't want to be involved anymore, in the way that they're like hands-on really going through and sorting, because a lot of the times they've already done that with their parent multiple times and are kind of just almost done with it. So we also have to walk the line of release as well. Does the person that I'm working with want me to be communicating or having the family involved in the process? Because sometimes there's family dynamics there that we're not aware of, and obviously there's things from the past that'll bubble up. So we talk to them about, hey, what family do you have involved? What other organizations are involved with you? Are you getting mental health? That's all part of our initial assessment. And really having the conversation of, when we start working together, do you want me to keep your family updated and involved? Are they going to also be helping maybe on the off weeks that we're not here? So as much or as little as that individual wants that family to be involved and be in communication with us, we follow their lead on that. So Danita, a really good question. What is the cost associated for seniors not living in affordable housing communities? So this kind of work in general in the Baltimore area will range somewhere in the 75 to 150 an hour range. So it is not inexpensive. Hoarding cleanup is quite costly, to be honest with you. So it's something that almost oftentimes is not attainable for people, especially out in the community, where if they're living in their own home, then there's a little less motivation to rectify the situation versus living in affordable housing where they have inspections every year and it is expected that their apartment is kept in a certain way for them to be able to live there. That's really the motivation to keep their apartments or their homes more organized. So yeah, so it can be quite costly, unfortunately, for those out in the community, for sure.
Heather, sometimes on this call, we have some other states join in. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, are you aware if there are other providers like yourself typically in each metro area, or how does that work?
Great question. So we are, like I said, we are a member of the National Association of Senior Move Managers. And I'll drop that in the chat. It's NASM for short. Oh, I mistyped that. Don't do NASM.org, O-R-G. um, and so there are providers all throughout the country and actually internationally as well. So if there are folks on the call who are not kind of in that Baltimore market, but need connections to resources outside of that area, they can certainly reach out to me and I can do a search of who is in their area. I will say, I'm not sure that there are other providers out there that have the funding that we do to cover parts of the costs of the services for folks. As far as I know, we are kind of the only one. But that doesn't mean that there aren't resources to tap into. So sometimes the Department of Aging in the area that you're living in or that the resident is living in might have some funding that they have available to help with some services. Sometimes other organizations, I know like in Baltimore, the Jewish Community Services sometimes has funding that they can put towards some of these services. So kind of tapping into that network of other organizations and connecting them in with the service provider might be the way to go. So what I'll do is I'll put my contact information in the chat as well, and people can grab it and reach out to me if they have specific questions about coverage. Okay, so I'm reading the question from Brittany. Are there early warning signs that a person's collection might be shifting into a hoarding behavior? In senior living communities, it can sometimes be hard to identify if they're putting their stuff of relationships when they may not have many relationships in their lives. You're right, absolutely about that. I think where I would start to have questions is when they are having trouble discarding things that other people would normally easily be able to let go of. So, are they saving all of the plastic bottles for a reason that doesn't just seem reasonable? Is their stuff starting to get in the way of navigating their apartment safely? That's the other big key here, is the safety part of this. So those would kind of be the two things that I would look at, is the anxiety of discarding and the safety of the apartment itself. Great questions, guys.
Heather, I would ask too, for the staff at Affordable Senior Housing Communities, if they think that they have a resident that they're concerned might have hoarding disorder, um, would they reach out to you and maybe provide some details, and then you would determine whether they should come out for an evaluation? Does the evaluation itself cost the resident money?
No, it does not. So yeah, so they would just get in contact with me. I get some details from them, and then we would schedule that initial consultation and assessment. I do recommend that if there is a relationship between the resident and either the service coordinator or the building manager of some sort that isn't particularly cantankerous, that it might be a good idea to have us both come out for that initial visit, just because it's kind of more of a warm handoff. And the person will, if they trust the building personnel, then me coming in with that person kind of instills a bit of trust to begin with. If that relationship is not in a great place, then it is often better for me to meet with them by myself, and do that assessment and have some of these conversations. And again, I think I already answered, but no, it does not cost them anything for the initial visit.
If anyone else wants to, has any questions you want to ask, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
We have a few more minutes left on the call, and I want to thank you, Heather, for all this great information.
Absolutely. And this is probably one of the main concerns that residents start to have, especially around inspection time and how to get ready for inspections. So that's why I kind of talked on this a little bit more specifically, but just encouraging folks to work on this on a regular basis. It's not just a one and done. You have to have maintenance when it comes to organizing. Just like your cleaning schedule, you don't just clean your house once, right? You clean it every week or every 2 weeks or whatever that looks like for you. And this is kind of in that same vein that people, it becomes less stressful to go through inspection if they've been keeping up with it throughout the year instead of waiting until the very end.
Is it helpful to have any type of resources in the building for residents that might, like a tip sheet on getting yourself organized ahead of inspection? I'm not sure if that would be a
That's a
useful
great
resource.
idea. Actually, I have a couple of tip sheets that I use and I can send these to you too, Dee, to share out. I have 100 things you can start decluttering now. It's just little things that you can do here and there. We have how much to have, like in these apartments, we don't need 12 place settings, right? So we recommend 4 to 6. So I have a tip sheet on kind of how much to have. And I also have one on how long to keep certain paperwork and documents that might be really helpful to have in the buildings as well.
Yeah, that sounds like that would be very helpful. And we will definitely share out the recording and then all the resources that you provide, Heather,
Yep,
for everyone that's
absolutely.
on the call today, and then everyone who has registered for the call that maybe just couldn't join today.
Okay, sounds great. And like I said, I'm here as a resource. If anybody has questions or want to bounce any ideas off of me, or again, if you need me to need a connection in your area, I'm happy to do that as well. So
Anyone else have any questions for Heather while we have her on?
oh, you're welcome, Sherry.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any, but Heather, thank you for sharing your contact information. So if anyone maybe has a question they didn't want to ask on the call or they think of later,
Yep,
they can reach out to you. And again, we'll share out all of the resources. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Heather, for your expertise.
absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining me today as well. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, Steve, for hosting.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Bye.
afternoon.